Okay. We're going to go ahead and get started. And I'll open us up with a word of prayer. Well, Heavenly Father, we thank you for gathering us here this morning. Lord, as we're going through chapter 4 of the book this week, and it shows us the value, the eternal purpose of gathering together, I pray that we would be encouraged and edified by this. Thank you for the time for all of us to interact and grow, and we thank you for your body, the church. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so if you've been following along, we're going through the book True Worshipers, Seeking What Matters to God by Bob Kauflin. We're in chapter 4, and the book goes through different elements of worship each chapter, and it draws from the story of the woman at the well. What is it to worship in spirit and truth? Chapter 4 this week is True Worshipers Gather. Worship in community. And as I was reading this, I thought of a story. Last year, I was at an event. They had live music, and the performer was taking a break, and him and I happened to be talking, and he was telling me this story about his guitars, and he said his dad was in Tennessee and ran into this older gentleman who was just trying to make some money. And he'd had this guitar, he'd had it for years, and it was dusty and old. And he said, "Hey, I'll give it to you for $75. Guy recognizes the name on the headstock, and he buys the guitar for his son because he knows that he is a performer. And so he's telling me about this, and he says, so I take it to a professional to get it set up, and it was a very high-end Gibson model guitar, probably worth around $5,000. And as I was reading this chapter, I thought how often I and maybe you maybe don't value what we have. This older gentleman probably walked by that guitar. It was a vintage guitar, probably for years, daily walked by it, had it in a closet or something, and just never recognized the value of it. And I just thought to myself, how true that is for me in the gathering together in worship. So hopefully, as we interact this morning, we can encourage one another and grow in our value for worship and community. So I want to start with a question. Why is gathering so important, and how is it worship? Yeah? So the Lord commands it? Mm-hmm.
Gathering together encourages one another.
Yeah. Yeah. How's it worship?
If you're giving up your time and your energy in order to focus on learning about God, I would consider that an act of worship. Sacrificing to focus on Him.
Yeah.
How we treat one another.
Mm.
And in his book, he said that worship is not a solitary event,
Mm-hmm.
it's a communal event.
Yeah. Yeah.
An aspect of being all in the same place that allows for edification that you can't do one-on-one.
Yeah.
And that's a way to worship.
Yeah. Yep.
Like love one another, like it displays your love of God and your love for His people and
Mm-hmm.
His word.
Yeah, so we see both of those. Love God, love one another, come together in this gathering, right? The chapter starts with a story about Steve and Sandy, and I laughed because it sounded close to Rob and Sandy, and I was like, this isn't Rob and Sandy at all. But oftentimes, though, I've this kind of hit home for me because I thought, man, this can be true for Kathy and I sometimes. But Steve and Sandy, they're hustling to service. They show up, they're a little late. That's the part that hit me. They're in the music. They get the kids dropped off. It talks about how Steve has got friends coming over to watch the ball game, and so he's thinking about that. He's distracted through the sermon. Sandy's thinking about how she's going to feed all these people, and they're kind of absent-minded, just there. They're doing their duty, and they rush out because they want to get the kids to take naps. They get home and they get on with their day. And I said this scenario plays out thousands of times a week for different people. And that just struck me because, like the story I told in the beginning, I can not value us gathering together and be focused on what's next, rather than seeing this kind of the pinnacle of my week and where I come together, get encouragement, draw off of this for the rest of the week. It's just something I do, and I've done my duty, and here I am, and I probably even said hi and made somebody laugh, so yay me, right? But that's not what our gathering is about. It's not just something we do. And so I wanted to ask, is there anybody that's willing to share or wants to share about a time where they were in a rut, where they just were kind of going through the motions, or maybe it's now. You weren't valuing worshiping God in community.
I mean, for me in the past, it's definitely been one of those things that can be a cycle in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like the last book we did, How People Change, is really on point for that, because you really have to want to get something out of a worship service, to get something out of it. Anybody who's been to the gym knows that you can show up to the gym and you can do some sets and not get much out of it. Or you can push, you can enjoy the time at the gym. You can go and really strive and try, and you get a lot more out of it. And I think worship service is that way. If you're just checking a box, if you're just showing up, it's pretty easy to show up and coast and nod and smile and shake a couple hands and get on with your day. And it's gonna be a burden. But when you invest, when you dive in, when you look forward to worship, when you read the passage ahead of time, when you're reading the chapter, when you really see it as something valuable, like you said, when you really value the thing that you've got, it gets a lot easier not to just show up and check the box. So I think it's one of those, take every thought captive things that we talk about sometimes. For me, I definitely know the more I put into it, the easier it is to find a real joy, a real celebration, a real community that you look forward to. I look forward to Sunday. I look forward to community group because it's become important to me. But it's easy for it not to be, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's how do we get to that point? Right, we get through our day-to-day. For me, it's whenever a new responsibility is added, I sort of get overwhelmed and devalue those important things in my life. But I think what you said, taking captive those thoughts, or building up a good conscience, conversations like this, valuing the church and our gathering and seeing the eternal purpose of it, can really help build up that conscience. So now, and hopefully in the future, when I start feeling like, I got to get up and go, I've got so many other things, there's kind of something that clicks in me like, that's not a right attitude. And so I think it's important to take captive those thoughts, build up a good, strong conscience, and how we value and feel about church. He draws on the point of Psalm 111:1 about thanking and praising God in the midst of the congregation. And he says that this is what true worshipers were made for, and it's central to what God is doing in the earth. He says that's what true worshipers were made for and central to what God is doing in the earth. And I thought that was both great and challenging, because I don't know that when I think of church, I think this is, I don't know that I would describe it that way before reading this chapter as true worshipers and central to what God is doing in the earth. But it did make me think of, Pastor Kevin 2 weeks ago talked about worshiping God and evangelism. And I think he skipped ahead and took your chapter, right? So, but what is evangelism unto? What is sharing the gospel unto? Our gathering, right? It's to our gathering, to our fellowship in the Lord, community in Christ. So there's a lot of different things we talk about as far as worship and things that we do as we gather. And we've mentioned evangelism, we've mentioned missions, we've mentioned a few different things. What are some things that we will stop doing once Christ returns and there's new heaven, new earth, and we are living eternally? What are some of the things that we will stop doing that are Christian activities now? Okay. Confessing sin. Yeah. Yeah.
I was going to say sin, but then he said Christian activities.
Trick question. No. What else?
Comforting each other.
Okay. Yeah. God will wipe away our tears. There'll be no more sin, death, or pain.
Making time for God.
Yeah.
The only time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you repeat what they're saying? Because they're I can't hear.
Making time for God, comforting others, confessing sin. We'll turn, sorry.
Might be a line here. Reading the Bible, because you'll be present with the Lord, or am I wrong?
I don't know.
Yes?
I haven't been there yet, Zach, so. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I don't know. I think we'll figure that one out when we get there. What about missions? Yeah, evangelism.
We won't be seeking and saving the lost.
Yeah.
There won't be anybody lost.
Yeah. I thought that was a good question to ask, because it kind of drives, what is this unto? What is the evangelism unto? It's, when I read in Revelation, there is innumerable multitudes worshiping God. Saints, angels, all types of strange creatures that we haven't seen worshiping God for eternity. And reading that and kind of gaining a little understanding in that really helps fuel those activities. This has an eternal purpose. We will gather and worship God for eternity. This is something that God wants me to celebrate and value. And seeing this as the fuel for those evangelism and those things, I want my children to be worshiping God with me in eternity. My wife, my friends, you guys, people I haven't met, because God is good.
I was just, as you were saying that, I was thinking it's interesting, because I think a lot of people, a lot of non-Christians will often think, well, I don't want to spend an infinite amount of time sitting on a cloud singing.
Playing
It
harps.
just doesn't seem
Yeah.
super interesting to me. But when we think of, I think when we're trying to think holistically about the Bible, when we think of worship, we shouldn't just think singing. That's one of the things we've talked about already.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hadn't thought thought about this really till you said that, but when we're in community, that's worship. And so worship in eternity is going to be time spent together. It's going to be serving one another.
Mhm.
Maybe not comforting. I know that's, there's not going to be any tears to wipe away, but that community is worship. That service is worship. That fellowship is worship. If everything we do is worship, and we're doing that forever, it's not just sitting on a cloud singing holy, 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 although we'll probably do that.
Mhm.
But everything we do will become worship. And so it makes eternity seem less one note
Mhm.
than it might when we're, first hearing about Christianity and you have the Looney Tunes perspective of heaven where it's, a cloud and a ghost form and a harp.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. I like that.
Well, and what's interesting about that thought too is you're usually by yourself in that sort of thought, right? But not in a community, worshiping and following the Lamb wherever He goes.
It's almost as if Looney Tunes isn't a good biblical movie.
Well, there was something in this chapter I wanted to read, and I thought it was just well put and worth reading. And it's on page 71. It says, God never intended our worship to be just me and God. That's because our worship is the outflow of the relationships the Father, the Son, and Spirit have always enjoyed. God isn't a solitary God. There is only one God, but He has existed as three persons from all eternity. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit have always experienced triune joy, giving and taking, sharing together a depth of relationship and love that human relationships are meant to echo. In His kindness, God saves us so we might experience the same joys of fellowship, outpouring, and mutual love that He does. What do you think about that?
I mean, this is like consumes a majority of our time in evangelism in our family. Walking this out with Muslims, like I've never thought so much about the Trinity in my entire life, and I still have a lot of questions about what it looks like for them to exist together for all of eternity. But I find a lot of comfort in seeing that the oneness that they are is because they all have one end purpose, and it's to the glory of God. It's to exalt God, and I don't really know where I'm going with this other than the fact that every time I see the Trinity being walked out and the priority that it is, and also that there is a oneness of God, it always just races my heart a little bit because I'm like, I wish that I could explain that so well and it be such a treasure for someone to hear. But I'm so flawed in my ability to articulate that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is this is very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
It's very mysterious, but it should be a huge encouragement, and it should come from our lips when we're sharing about it. Like, it shouldn't be something that we're afraid of because it feels big,
Mm-hmm.
because it's powerful when it comes to our purposes of worship and what our worship will look like, that it's already been demonstrated
Mm-hmm.
in the triune God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Going back to the point you're making about how God is just a singular God or God, personal God. He is. I mean, he is with us, but then He is with us collectively in the church. And I was what I'm going to call pulling a rush on the last sermon. He quoted the end of all the epistles, but the beginning of all Paul's epistles, he mentions the saints who are in Ephesus, the servants, the brothers, the faithful, the
Mhm.
while it's important for us individually to be reading it and to be walking with the Spirit and proving our obedience and servitude, the message in general is towards the church, not an individual.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. Which makes me think of just creation. You know, our triune God for eternity has enjoyed fellowship, Father, Son, and Spirit. And it made me think of when, and he points this out in the book, he says, that it's not good for man to be alone. And then I thought that was before the fall. You know, God wanted us to be in community. The community aspect of things wasn't after the fall as something to maybe keep us just accountable and things. He created us with that intention to enjoy that community together. In the Old Testament, he talks about how individual and family devotion to God was expected. So I don't want to diminish that individual and family devotion, but oftentimes that's what comes and fuels our gathering together, is that individual and family devotion throughout the week, to where my girls come home and they say, so-and-so said this today. And because some of you have been teaching your children at home, there's some encouraging thing that my kids learned from your kids, or some encouragement. Hey, I was reading this in Scripture this week, or I went through this, and this Scripture helped me. I think of, Kathy was having working through some stuff, and Marna reached out and helped her, and so that was part of the fuel from her individual or your family worship that really helped her and was a blessing to her. So it's not to diminish those two things, but he points out that in the Old Testament, the Israelites' year was marked by annual festivals where God's people gathered together to celebrate his goodness and renew his covenant with them. And in the New Testament, we're called the temple of the living God. So there's Old Covenant, New Covenant. There's always this pre-fall, post-fall. There's always this sort of God's people are meant to gather together. And so I was going to ask, when I was listing out questions that I thought would be helpful and maybe point us in the right direction, I was going to ask, do you think that being a part of a church is optional? But then I thought that would be an obvious question, because everybody here obviously thinks that it's not optional. But I do want to ask, because as I said in the beginning, I wrestle with this sometimes in valuing the church. Do you think that our commitment and will for service to God's people, the church, is optional?
He gave us gifts to use in glorify him, to exalt him, but also to use in our service to each other.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at Acts, like in the beginning of it, and like you see the Holy Spirit like poured out on the people, and then what comes after that, the building of the church, them giving their time, eating together, like it is a representation of what God has done in your heart and how the overflow should be. And to me, it's not optional. It should be
Mm-hmm.
a representation of what the Lord is doing in your life. It's an outpouring of his love to you, to others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think when we see the church as serving us, we can fall into a mindset of it being optional, because then we can like take ourselves off of the plate of the church. Like, well, they don't need to bother with me today. Like, if anything, there's extra seats in the pew, and
Mm-hmm.
but when you see the point of the church as being for mutual edification, pushing each other forward, building each other up, you take on a very different role, that like your going or not going has a significant impact.
Mm-hmm.
And not because you have this grand thing to say, but because your presence is just just an encouragement to others. I'm sure I'm not the only one on worship team that would say this, but like it brings tears to my eyes when I'm up there and it's full and I hear everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And there are certain songs that we sing that bring that about, like You've Already Won. Most people are hands up and eyes full, like ready to burst forth tears. Like, and that's not some emotional over the top, but I think it's a reality that I'm praying to God that we will experience someday, which is this fullness. That when there's this fullness and when everyone that's there wants to be present and is pouring themselves out, there is such an encouragement. I'm just realizing like my voice is combined with everyone else's, or just in a group discussion, sitting around praying with Bhavna the other day about this scholarship situation, like to have people gathered and not trying to do it over Skype or not trying to, you know, throw it together with one or two people. Like there was a gathering of many women, and that was, it's just powerful to realize like you matter when you come on Sunday. Like your place is an encouragement to other people, even if you don't feel like you've done anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that to your point, and I'm glad you touched on that, you made the point that if you come thinking, I'm just going to receive,
Yeah.
then it kind of creates this optional effect. But do you think, too, that if you come thinking, I'm just here to serve, that it can have another consequence, that you're
Well,
just,
because then you feel like a waste if you don't.
right. And then your value comes in that. And I often find, I find Scripture a lot of times pins us between two truths, and it's to keep us kind of walking straight, And there's times in my life where I feel like I'm coming here to serve, I'm going here, and then I kind of lose sight of that. I need to receive as well. And there's times where I come like, what am I getting out of this? And then I'm not focused on serving. And walk by many things or people or opportunities to care for one another and talk to each other. So I think, to hit that point and summarize, I think we should be coming with both a mentality. I'm coming here because I need what God has put in my brothers and sisters in Christ, and because someone else needs what God's put in me to share, or God can use what God's put in me. So, what if you're not feeling that way? What if I don't feel like church is a joy? And I were to come to you and say, it's a drudgery, I love the Lord, but I'm just in a point where I just don't feel happy coming to church. What would you tell me?
One of the things that I immediately think of is, okay, what is going on or what has gone on in your life to bring you to that place? And the fact that you've been transparent in sharing that tells me that there's something that you haven't revealed yet. And I want to help you draw that out to see what's going on. Where did I lose my focus? What happened? Circumstances, situations, whatever it may be, to help you walk through that, to help you, because I've been there before and everybody else has been there before. That's why being together is so important. We're walking this path together.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think too, like, I like how you put in the like circumstances. Like, I remember when the kids were super little, and I inevitably like could not sit through a service, and I was like, what is the point of coming? Like
Mm-hmm.
I can't hear the word of God. These kids won't shut up and just sit inside the class.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
frustrating.
Yeah.
It was more frustrating for me to come, and I remember Isaac would be like, this is a small time in our life, and like keeping the habit of coming is important, and God will use this time. And as I, grew in perspective of time, like I saw like even if I couldn't sit in a service and I was like in the
Mhm.
and just encouraging them to, it is important to keep coming. The Lord will grow you through this time. It may be frustrating, but it's not forever, even if it feels like it,
Mhm.
but then also like, like your children need exposure to God and his people. Like, so I think learning, like sometimes you have to be open to learning like new things of like why, what is the purpose of this? Like there is purpose in it, and it is a season.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes too, like, if you're like in a spiritual dryness, like, or you're just, it's a struggle to like open your Bible, like maybe having somebody to decide, like, hey, let's meet together this week. Like, let's get in his word and like let's talk about where you're at and like why you're having this. But it's not anything new under the sun.
Mhm.
People struggle with this too.
Yeah.
I saw John MacArthur address this one time. He said it was sometimes if your worship on Sunday is not where it should be for whatever reason, because you haven't exercised that worship throughout the week. It's like Rush Gardner trained for a marathon. If he only runs one day a week, what's going to happen? And we got him through the whole week,
Mhm.
and everything's changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
The thing that I keep hearing is that you come alongside that person. You get their arm over your shoulder and you help them walk it out. You don't just say, gee, sorry about your luck, or pray harder, or go home and read your Bible.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? I have a question. I was thinking about this as I was reading the chapter. Whether we like it or not, a lot of times our culture affects how we view things. How do you think our culture affects how we view church? Attendance, participation.
Since COVID and also my ministry being, I know multiple people that are like, yeah, I go to this church. And I'm like, oh. And then like really they're just live streaming, right? And they're just watching the church service from the comfort of their living room still.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's a temptation that people are falling into. Praise the Lord, not the people in this room, obviously. But I think that that is one aspect, just the digital world that we live in is making it less likely to be in community with other people in general.
And why is that a bad thing? Why can't I just sit at home and watch the...
Then you're not seeing each other. You're not getting those little bits of encouragement like Holly was talking about, even when it's really hard. And like also like Holly was saying, like it's really hard for her during that season, but like I've seen Holly go through that season, and now I'm in that season, and I can remember that Holly was in that season, right?
Mhm.
So like seeing each other go through seasons of hardship and still be here when you're in hardship, it makes it so much sweeter.
Yeah. When I'd say, too, how is anyone going to know you're in hardship if you're not here and we're not doing life together? There are a lot of people in this room who, if I was, in a rut, you would notice by my behavior, no matter how hard I tried to hide it, because you know me. You see me weekly. We talk outside of community group and church. If I'm sitting at home live streaming, or even a conference, he talks about going to conferences. Conferences are great. It's, I've always seen it as like a slice of heaven on earth, where you go and you're fellowshipping with people that, every tribe and tongue and nation, hopefully, and worshiping God together. But that's not communal church living, is it? So yeah, I think there's a blessing in the independence that we have, right? Who can count the value of the missionaries that we've sent? I was encouraged when Kathy and I were looking for a church 7-8 years ago. we had 4 or 5 churches within 25 minutes of our house that were great churches. That was very encouraging for us. It was actually very hard to pick one because of that. So there's great parts of the independence of our culture and the ability that we can worship. We have the freedom to worship. But I think that challenge is it's not a spectator sport. And we depend on God, and in his design, he wants us to be together and depend on one another. And that that kind of underlying downside, I would say, of the culture can kind of drive that, I know, in my heart. And, we get that sometimes. I can even get this sort of mentality where I'm like, I just need to go off alone and worship God. And maybe that's true, but maybe I need someone to call me out, or someone to talk me through something, or someone to pray for me. And there is a side, it's a proverb that says, a man who isolates himself seeks his own gain. And God commands me not to just worry about my own well-being and gain, but the well-being of everyone. And go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things you said is really interesting, because you had 4 or 5 good churches you could pick from.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really a blessing. But it can really be a struggle, because if things don't work out here, well, I got 3 or 4 other choices. I don't have to put in the hard work.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine in a relationship if I thought, well, Sherry and I are getting along great, but I got 3 or 4 other good choices. That would
Yeah.
be madness, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
insanity.
Right.
No, I only have one wife. I have her for the rest of my life, and I've got to put in the work.
Yeah.
I can't just go get another wife.
Mhm.
That's not how marriage works.
Right.
And relationship in the church should be the same way. We can't just say, oh, I'm not getting along with Dave so well these days. It's kind of tough. I think I'll just head down the street. There's another good church,
Yeah.
half a mile away. I can just move and do whatever I like. It becomes this transactional relationship. Well,
Yeah.
I'm not getting as much as I'm given. Let me just move on. I got another choice.
Mm-hmm.
God hasn't called us to a consumer, transactional, quid pro quo relationship in church. We're servants. We stick it out. We put in the hard work.
Mm-hmm.
Leaving a church should be a huge deal.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you have to move for work. Sometimes you have to pick another church. There's, the teaching at the church you're going to is not good anymore, but you got to put in the work first. You got to go talk to somebody. You got to say, I'm here, and this is my church, and this is causing me a problem, and let's talk about it.
Yeah.
You can't just, well, this is not working out. Let me head somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I think that that consumer mentality, that abundance, can sometimes, make us a little bit more like a consumer than
Mm-hmm.
a community member.
Yeah. That could be a negative side effect too.
I mean, it's great, but it's also dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope I'm answering your initial question, but you talked about how the community kind of affect the church a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought about, the things that the world calls exciting,
Mm-hmm.
how it can taper off, what we think and here is exciting, how we get our highs from watching a sports game or going somewhere playing putt golf or some kind of thing that raises our just excitement, and then we come in here and we kind of not consciously we compare it and think that this is not a good time or we're not enjoying ourselves as much, and I guess I probably don't see that consciously a lot with us in here, but the world kind of thinks that we don't have a good time, and that's why why being a Christian is kind of like not really the thing, because it's like there's no more fun or something like that. But I think we kind of set standards of like, is this a good time, versus what this is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think some of our modern conveniences, marketing, access to all different types of fun things can almost make us thrill seek, even at church. Yeah. So he goes through a list of things that Scripture and church history affirm, that are activities that we go through. And I'm going to list them off. And then I want to get to embracing the blessing of our gathering together. What are the benefits of it? And so, singing, praying, offerings, confessing our faith, greeting one another, teaching and admonishing one another, confessing our sins, exercising spiritual gifts, hearing God's word proclaimed and taught, participating in sacraments, and more. I'm sure you thought of some things too. But some of the benefits of our worship community, he talks about the gospel as an endless source of encouragement, strength, comfort, and motivation for weary souls. Do you recognize when you're here and you see others excited about the gospel? Does that encourage your excitement in the gospel? Yeah, I think it's important to see others excited about the gospel as well, which provides an encouragement that we can't get just by ourselves. Receiving God's word together. We touched on it a little bit earlier, but what is the purpose and importance of receiving God's word together?
Remove the individualistic piece of it. Like, it's not about just what's happened for me, but what God has collectively done for a people of all tongue, tribe, and nation. And it's a we.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're receiving the word together, we are hearing that, being convicted, and confessing that together, and hopefully then also to one another afterward.
Mm-hmm.
If we need to mend broken relationships, or we do that together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think there is, in God's sovereignty, an element of maybe him wanting us as a body here, being taught through his word, that he might be speaking to us on Sunday mornings? And maybe I asked that in a confusing way. So do you ever think about the Sunday morning preaching, rather than it getting lost in a sea of sermons that you could listen to online or podcasts, as God sovereignly and specifically speaking to Paramount as a body? And when we miss that, I was on vacation last week. Listening to the sermon after the fact, if I miss, is important to me, because I think that God is speaking to us as committed members. As Court, you pointed out, the commitment is key to the local church. But do you see that, or do you think about the sermons that way?
It connects us all together.
Mm-hmm.
Isaac and I have talked about, the Catholic Church, wherever you're going, they speak on the same scriptures. So, they could walk into one here in Bexley, or they could go to California and they'd be speaking on the same thing. And it's one of those things that it's we don't have that in the Protestant church, but
Mm-hmm.
there is a connection of going through a certain passage, like a book of
Mhm.
And now we have opportunity to expand and maybe to encourage other people who didn't necessarily catch a certain part of the message. And so through that time of conversation, and it isn't just the sermon, wait a few days, talk about it again. We are already thinking and praying through that thing, so then when we meet together, it's just God being able to enhance what he wanted us to hear, both corporately and individually.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, perfect. I was hoping you'd mention community group, but we are running out of time. But yeah, there is an element of unity in that message. And Zach had an answer where he said, "I'm going to pull a rush here." To a different crowd, that reference has no meaning. But we're all hearing that same message. It's God's word being preached through men, and we can receive from God and encourage one another in those things because we all have that unified reference point in what God is saying to us through his word. So, all right, well, thanks, guys, and we are going to wrap things up. So.